Rejoice! EA being sold off to Saudi Arabia, becoming laden in debt, having to sell itself off, will not cause mass layoffs or studios to shut down, access departments to be gutted. It is not going to cause them to reverse their stances on their ill-chosen developmental direction. EA is not going to change because it has been sold. It was sold because it got to the point where change was inevitable. There's a complete misunderstanding of cause and effect here. Rivers are not what happens when rain decides to show up uninvited and gather in long, winding channels. Rivers are made over lengthy periods of water carving out its own path. Developers of EA, before you try and play victim, this is not something that is happening to you. This is something you did to yourselves. You carved your own path. So please, do not worry. EA has already been a trash fire of the games industry for over a decade, regular worst corporation of the year, pushing the boundaries of acceptable corporate bad practices and anti-consumer trends, competing with ABK and Ubisoft. Well, I will not lie to you and pretend things are gonna improve. Let's be honest, it really can't get any worse. So what should gamers and developers expect? Gamers. The EA buyout is not an opportunity to give better customer experience, be more consumer friendly, make better games. Saudi and their partner firms looked at EA and they realized we can squeeze more money out better. EA was just not being corporate enough. Developers. Accordingly, many are afraid for their jobs. That they will no longer be able to make games like Veilguard with their fetish disaster, coffee swilling conversations in tea shops, they, them, canary leaving behind the problematic hulking bullman of the past to embrace putrid tiefling wannabes instead. Anti-woke crusaders, I want to take a rare moment to cross the line and give some positive feedback to frightened activist developers. You are not going to be losing your job over Veilguard. You are not going to be losing your job because Saudi Arabia is purging the ESG, DEI, woke SJW activists that care more for politics and game design. Activists. You are not going to be hit by mass layoffs over your ideology. Relax. Saudi Arabia just doesn't care. You have nothing to fear. And I mean this in the most genuine way possible. You are not going to get laid off over your identity or beliefs. You're going to be laid off because your job is to make video games and you fucking suck at making video games. Put the fries in the bag. Welcome home. There's going to be some serious purges, and those purges are not going to have anything to do with anything but performance. And EA developers, you are the reason the studio had to get sold in the first place. See, you might not be aware of this, but the reason a company hires an employee is always the same. Increase company value. That is the reason you exist. Developers, all you had to do was make video games people want to play. You chose, over and over, instead to antagonize gamers, ruined long-running franchises, and were unappealing to people who wanted to give you money for your product. That's it. That's the entire equation. You bungled this, you get laid off. The only problem with EA was they weren't laying you off when they should have, which, for many of you, was right before they hired you. And look, some EA developers deserve to keep their jobs. And you would have kept your jobs if EA fired the problem developers the moment they became problems. If they kept the damage minimal, you'd still probably be fine. But EA let a small disease fester and grow, and now they need to amputate the entire limb. Activist developers, the surge in layoffs is a result of your own efforts to degrade the company and the games industry as a whole. And what a job you've done! Now, AA and indie studios are starting to beat out massively more influential and wealthy AAA studios. You set up the perfect David and Goliath, and you're the Goliath. Talented developers being laid off. You're actually in a beautiful situation right now. You can get out under the thumb of AAA, and you can use that real talent to make a Schedule 1, Claire Obscure, a Balatro, or join a small studio and maybe make a Baldur's Gate 3. Just remember, what comes next to EA is not caused by this acquisition. This acquisition is happening because the studio reached a point where it can no longer avoid these changes. A river is not rain deciding to show up and move into a winding crevice in the land. A river forges its own pathway over a long period of time. They destroyed Bioware, ruining a studio that had decades of being one of the biggest Western RPG makers. A massively influential studio that built Neverwinter, The Old Republic, Mass Effect, Dragon Age, and Baldur's Gate, only to prove that right now they can make a Veilguard. At the same time, a studio a quarter their size brings out Baldur's Gate 3. EA slept on some of the best shooter mechanics with Titanfall. They botched Battlefront. They brought Battlefield from being the COD competitor to almost being out of the conversation entirely. Their rare success is almost always some small project or indie-style game that feels completely accidental, like it exists because it slipped under the notice of meddling executives. EA is a dilapidated house that should be condemned, ripped up, rebuilt from scratch. The IPs may be salvageable, but they need new architects. AAA games industry did this to themselves. It's not a coincidence that EA, Ubisoft, ABK, Bethesda all got sold off at about the same time while running the same scams, making the same mistakes. AAA learns nothing. Square Enix nearly collapsed over Forspoken and Avengers. Yet, they're still dead set on ruining their reputation to try to appeal to a Western audience that was invented by consultant worm tongues in their ears. Sony learned nothing from the backlash over The Last of Us 2. It comes out on Steam to a lousy $30,000 concurrent, the legendary game that took home every award. On the other hand, Sony also brings out Stellar Blade, universally snubbed by Game Awards and lying journalists alike, and it gets 200,000. So what was Sony's next move? Learn from the success of Stellar Blade? Or embrace the critic recognition of The Last of Us 2? Well, apparently they went with the latter. They go for Concord, dumping $500 million on what they said would be Sony's Star Wars. Turns out, it was Disney's Star Wars, so maybe a monkey paw situation there. And when Concord completely bombed, what did they learn? Was that the point? Were the repeated failures and mounting losses open their eyes? Nope. $500 million gone. What's their next move? Fair Games and Marathon. Games so bad, they're probably not even going to make it to release. Embracer Group, haven't heard much of them, have we? Went from monthly excitement over their acquisitions to a "where are they now" segment. Saudi Arabia decided to renege on a massive deal at the final hour, and I wonder how many of the studios and IPs that Embracer desperately had to sell off to avoid complete eradication ended up in the hands of Saudi investors in the end. Oh, but that's conjecture. Well, we can be certain there's far more dirty dealing and corruption in the games industry than we know. We're never going to know, admittedly, the exact details of all of them. It's like smelling a corpse in a room of locked cabinets and not having the keys. Xbox bought 100 studios and then shut down half of them. Compare the Mario movie to the Halo show for a tip on how much they care about their franchise reputations. Redfall, Avowed, but here comes their savior. The first quadruple A game after Skull and Bones with Perfect Dark, and it's gone. Speaking of Skull and Bones, Ubisoft, no. We can leave it at that. Does anyone really need convincing when it comes to Ubisoft failing games where there's more enjoyable content in the 2-hour-long credits than the 40-hour-long open-world slog? Remember, Ubisoft has competent devs. You can prove this. Just let 33 of them go off to do their own thing, and you end up with a Clair Obscur. When you have such persistent, overwhelming failures with 0 attempts to course correct, we have to cheer. They get the layoffs and studio shutdowns they deserve, but are things gonna change? Nothing can guarantee you're gonna keep your job forever, but you're gonna have a lot more job security if you can prove yourself irreplaceable. If you can create value for the corporation, AAA games devs, you took this for granted, you didn't understand your role, you made enemies of your customers, and nobody wants to fight on your behalf when fear of AI replacing you has finally become inevitable. We can't say much for certain on what this acquisition will mean for EA, but I wager we're not going to see all EA games suddenly become thinly guised funnels for Saudi propaganda, not in the same way activists pushed woke ideology since the early 2010s. We're probably not going to see women being banned from playing Need for Speed in the future. But if you want at least one guarantee, EA is going to go very heavily into AI to replace jobs, and this was avoidable. Just like this sale was avoidable. The gaming audience saw the iceberg a decade ago. We told you to avoid it, we told you to slow down on the activism, we told you to change course. We saw the iceberg years in advance. We did our due diligence by letting you know. Games industry, you chose to hit that iceberg. And after you hit it, you kept choosing to hit more and more of them. That's something we need to always drive home to these people when they whine about layoffs, studio shutdowns, games, media collapsing, companies being bought up. The games industry made this happen. The consultants encouraged them down this path, and the games audience tried to stop it over and over and over again. Gamers, never let them make you feel responsibility or guilt for the consequences of their own actions. So let's repeat. EA is not going to change because it's being sold. It's being sold because it needs to change. Like, comment, and subscribe as we continue to have a laugh at the expense of an industry that forgot how to entertain. And to the necromancers puppeteering the corpse of Bioware and defiling Dragon Age with your Veilguard skin suit, please enjoy the fruit of your labors. I apologize for absolutely nothing.